Let's get started. I want to welcome each and every one of you, especially to our panelists for this great session where we are celebrating the 50th anniversary of technology transfer from the AUTM perspective. Today our topic is the growth and changes in tech transfer over the years and AUTM's impact on tech transfer. This panel discussion will celebrate the 50th anniversary of technology transfer by examining its growth and transformation with a focus on AUTM's key role in shaping the field. The panelists will explore how tech transfer evolved from its early days, highlighting the growing complexity of commercialization, policy changes, and the expanding role of universities in innovation. The conversation will also reflect AUTM's impact in fostering professional development, advocating for best practices, and building a global network of tech transfer professionals. Attendees will gain insights into how the field has adapted to meet new challenges and opportunities in research, entrepreneurship, and economic development. Today, I'm the moderator, Dr. Almisha Campbell, RTTP. I'm a Vice President for Research and Economic Development at Jackson State University, and I've had the honor of serving as a past chair of AUTM. Today with me, the panelists are Arundi Pradham, Laura Savasky, Dave Winward, and Alwyn Wang. And without further ado, I will ask the panelists to do a quick pitch, elevator pitch, 1 minute, about themselves, their current positions, and the universities or organizations that they represent, as well as how long they have served AUTM. Again, I will start with R&D.
Thanks, Misha. So I have the privilege of being the longest serving AUTM member here on this panel. I started my career in '87, and my first meeting was a SUPA meeting in '88. I was at the University of Utah then, spent many years there, and went from there to Colorado State University, Oregon Health and Science University, and now I'm at the University of Wyoming. In between OHSU and the University of Wyoming, I was an entrepreneur and a consultant and was a part of 3 startup companies. So I got to experience tech transfer from both sides.
Thank you. And the next person we have on here is Laura.
Hi, everybody. I'm Laura Savatsky. I'm currently Executive Director for Innovation and Technology Transfer at University of Louisville. I started in tech transfer as a scientist with a personal mission of saving patient lives and making science matter, and got involved in my early scientific career on the bench with a discovery that our team had made, and formed a startup. It was a roller coaster ride, a wild ride, as many of you know, and got really excited about the field from that early experience. And so started in tech transfer in the early 2000s, and it's been just such an exciting time of looking at the role of startups, looking at the role of funding and venture, and as you can imagine, it's been fun.
Thank you, Laura. David?
Dave Winwood, President for Tech Transfer Commercialization, housed at Wake Forest Innovations at Wake Forest University School of Medicine. This office serves as a technology transfer office for Advocate Health. Some of you in the Midwest in particular may be familiar with that name.
David, you're very hard to hear. Can you get closer to your mic, maybe? We can pick up some, but not all.
Okay. That's the first time that has ever happened. So how much did you hear? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, but my volume is turned all the way up.
So Vice President of Tech Transfer Commercialization, Wake Forest Innovations, part of the Health System and School of Medicine at Wake Forest. We also manage intellectual property for the entire Advocate Health enterprise, which is a 6-state health system from the upper Midwest down into the deep South. And so that's a little change of pace. I've been here almost 3 years, previously served in leadership roles at several institutions, UAB, UNC is where I started my tech transfer career in '96, having before that had 13 years in startup companies, some of which came out of university environment. So I have a little experience on both sides of that equation. So I've been heavily involved in AUTM for coming up 30 years now. It's been a real privilege to do that.
Thank you, Dave. And Alwyn, good night to you, and see you next.
Okay, well, compared to all these former presidents of AUTM, I'm the new kid on the block, and I've been involved with AUTM probably a good 10 years, but still I'm the youngest one, as far as seniority goes. And my first physical encounter with AUTM before joining the actual annual meeting was the automation meetings. That started maybe about 15 years ago. And the first one, and I had mentioned in that little pre-meeting chat with David Winwood, was in AUTM Asia in Chiang Mai, and that was 2016. And fast forward that for about 10 years, and since I've been involved with ATTP, first as a council member, then a board member, and then lo and behold, and AUTM started as the International Strategy Committee, and somehow I was honored to be sucked in, and I get to know everybody after 5 years' time, and you get to know me after 7 years' time, and here I am, and serving as chair of ATTP, and trying to bridge the world together with multiple networks and bridges and all that. And it's not easy, but it's been very exciting. And I have many role models stemming out from the AUTM or whatever that was pre-AUTM, the Association of University Technology Managers, stemming for the 1980s. And they still are today my great mentors for me to go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Alwyn. And with myself, with 16 years, combined panelists, over 75 years of experience in tech transfer. So I hope you learned something great today that will impact the work that you're doing and also give you a historical perspective of where tech transfer was and where it is now and hopefully where it's going. So our first set of questions, we're going to focus on historical perspective and evolution. So first question, looking back 50 years, what were the early drivers that helped shape the field of technology transfer, and how has these drivers evolved over time? And I think, Arundip, because you've been here the longest, this is probably a perfect question for you.
Sure. So when I started my career, our focus was patenting and licensing, right? It was get the technology patented, find a licensee, and working with startup companies was very different. A faculty member would come to you and say, I want to do a startup company. We would negotiate and execute a license agreement and say, good luck. I think the biggest change that I've seen, I mean, we still have a huge focus on patenting and licensing, but the biggest change that I've seen is the realization that we just can't let faculty members loose on the range. I'm from Wyoming, so you're going to have a lot of range references, and let them find their own way, because that is the sure way to die a quickest death. So what universities started doing was really putting programs into place, and that has evolved to actually creating sometimes standalone programs at universities or programs within the tech transfer offices that educate faculty members on what it means to be part of a startup company, all the way from, entrepreneurship boot camps to, hey, let me teach you about licensing so that you can make smart decisions, to technology gap funds that advance technologies, to now some universities even have seed funds to invest in university startup companies. So that has been sort of the single most change over time that I've seen especially when it comes to dealing with university entrepreneurs.
Thank you so much, Arandeep. And also, Dave, do you have anything that you would like to add to that? You're the second longest running person at Autumn here on this book.
I'm on the junior list anymore. Great comments by Arun, and I'd echo those. I would say the notion of having lived in the startup world myself, and at that time really had no clue what university tech transfer was. What do you mean this came from the university where I was a postdoc? So it's really been it was a fast learning curve for me to figure out exactly what Arun said. There's often interest in somebody running off with an idea. Well, hold on, hold your horses, as you might say in Wyoming. Just there are, I think now, many more informed decisions being made about how is the best approach that we need to work together with the innovators internally, along with consideration for marketplace expectations and realities, which maybe weren't around even when I started doing this a few years after you did. So we were a little more free with our licensing maybe than maybe was realistic. And I think that reality check has paid dividends. I mean, I think I don't have, Steve might be able to tell us what the stats are for how many of our startups last for 5 years or 10 years anymore. But my sense is that there's an improvement in that metric somewhere. So I'd echo that as a real important aspect of what we've done as a profession.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think there are several studies out there now that compare university formed startups versus non-university startups, and the success rate for university spinoffs is significantly higher than those that are not.
I think we just had someone share the screen. Thank you. Okay, thank you all so much. I think those are very important when you're talking about the historical perspective of tech transfer. And how did the passage of the Bayh-Dole Act influence the trajectory of university tech transfer? And what unexpected outcomes, whether they be negative or positive, have emerged since its implementation? And this can go for anyone that wants to chime in.
I'd actually love to hear what Steve Sasalka has to say about this question. I think he's kind of our resident Bayh-Dole expert, even though he's not officially on the panel. I wonder if Steve would unmute and chime in.
Welcome to the panel, Steve Sasalka.
I see how this is. All right. All right. So the impact of the Bayh-Dole Act on, and do you want to kind of hone me in on a particular area? Because as you know, the Bayh-Dole Act revolutionized our entire profession, both in the United States, and it actually is now expanded into Bayh-Dole analogs worldwide. So you want to kind of direct me sort of what you want me to focus on?
I think we could talk about specifically how that Bayh-Dole Act has influenced where we are now with tech transfer, specifically looking at now that we have CHIPS and Science Act and we have all these different the tech hubs and the NSF Art and all these programs now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I know this is only an hour and you've got other questions you want to hit, so I'm going to be brief on this. So what the Bayh-Dole Act was, it allowed us to provide the infrastructure. So both government and institution funded infrastructure to allow us to better commercialize our inventions. That then led to the development of inventions such as the COVID vaccines, that were the result of literally decades of research and economic development and tech transfer going forward. That then, so if you had the infrastructure first, then you had the effect. Now, the third thing that's now happened is a recognition by government and the public on the importance of tech transfer in a way that was never seen before. And all of this was catalyzed by the Bayh-Dole Act. I'm sure the rest of the panel can provide additional examples, but that's sort of kind of the big broad brush strokes on what the Bayh-Dole Act did and led to where we are today.
Thank you, Steve. And I think that's why it's so important that we continue advocating for the Bayh-Dole Act because of what it has done for tech transfer, particularly at the university level. So thank you for that, Steve. And just so you know, since Laura called on you, you're honorary panelist for today. Yeah, so our next question is, what are some of the key inflection points or disruptions in the tech transfer profession over the last 5 decades? And Laura, I'll throw this at you since you just threw your question to Steve.
Oh, okay. Turnabout is fair play. Okay. Well, I think back to the time of when SUPO was getting started and what was going on in the world. Globally, we had the rise of the World Intellectual Property Organization in the 1960s, and then the Bayh-Dole Act in the early 1980s kind of revolutionized and gave universities and research institutions, anyone who was federally funded, the ability to administer their own programs and do their own patenting and capture value from these innovations, whereas previously it was the government who owned those rights if it was government funded, yet the government had no way of pushing it forward. So there was a big learning there for universities and academia to launch offices, grow them, people to get their feet under them. And that happened from about the 1980s to the 2000s. And I think also funding is a really big mega impactor of technology transfer. If you remember, the NIH doubled its research budget over a 5-year period in the early 2000s. And that led to a lot of medical innovations and a lot of innovations that we see today in our innovation economy. Steve mentioned the COVID vaccines. There are many others like, you know, if you look at the Better World Project, you'll see tons of success stories of commercial products that are brought to us from technology transfer. And then in the past 20 years, Arun, you mentioned our new focus on startups, this shift from sort of the old school tech transfer of we're just focusing on patent and licensing to now we're quite focused on the development of the technology. And that's really changed in the way companies and investors view risk and view investment in technology. That's a big mega trend and a big disruptor, I think, today still in tech transfer. And then lastly, the role of individual governments has a lot to do with how we play locally. And though the panelists here, many of them are here in the United States, but we also have to, I think, keep in mind that wherever we are, our federal government can play a huge role and a huge influence on us through which programs they fund, to what level. You know, we've seen China, for example, become a major filer of patents. And I think China's, powerful position in the field of tech transfer is going to be on the rise with all of these patent filings that they have. So I think those are just some of the things that I think of when I think back in history and think about a historical perspective, what I think of as important in the field right now.
Thank you, Laura. Alwyn, do you have anything you want to add to this? And I see R&D hands up next. So,
well, I guess, from a global perspective, what AUTM and the pioneers of United States has taught us, or that shown us, what is the way to go. Number one is intellectual property and knowledge-based research development would be an intangible asset, and put that asset into use. And this is what other countries are learning. And out of regional competition, not to worry about the geopolitics yet, we would be talking about the uplifting and the economic development that is very much pinned upon the innovative development of the technology side. Well, by and large, the university would play a very pivotal role, and having some sort of IP policy close to Bayh-Dole Act, really, I can see that a lot of the emerging countries and economies are learning from the United States, UK, and whatever, I can see it from a collective, collaborative European Union. And with that, I can see a flourishing development and expansion of what hinge upon the Vitals Act, the intellectual property, and the ownership, and the, if you would use the European word, the valorization of technology from our research for the benefit of mankind. This is actually the very grand definition of technology transfer, and I can go on, but that I would imagine, at least from my personal perspective, United States has really taken the leadership, and I have great mentors from people like Victor Nelson, who would always go me if I talk about money, financial returns, is that transfer is not about money. And from Kathy Koo, from Stanford, and then you just go out and do something that you see it is of value to the society, and those are like the mentors and the working examples that we can show to the world. So in that regard, collectively, from your 50 years, from Autumn and to the world, we are doing a gigantic kind of global but yet low code capacity building to make tech transfer a profession, and also the kind of stakeholders that we can impact upon a better community.
Thank you for that international perspective, Alwyn, and I'll turn it over to R&D who's waiting.
Yeah, I echoing what Laura and Alwyn said, I think I just want to make a couple of points. For those of you who don't know, SUPA stood for Society of University Patent Administrators. So I think one of the key historical fundamental mind shifts was we're not patent administrators, and so we became the Association of University Technology Managers. At the time that happened, Kathy Koo was the president of Autumn, and the leadership comprised of Kathy Leda, I think Steve Atkinson, Niels Reimers, names that probably everybody has heard of, but most of us probably have not met, other than Kathy and Leda. At the time that the association was contemplating a name change, my boss at the time, who was the director of the tech transfer office at University of Utah, Norm Brown, suggested a name, the National University Technology Transfer Society, so we could go from SUPA to nuts. So interesting point of history. I tell that story, and it's pretty endearing. A couple of other things that kind of led to a fundamental shift in the way Autumn approaches things was when I was on the board for 5 years, and this was under John Fraser's and Mark Kroll's leadership. We added international board members for the very first time, and that was Paul Liu, and then after that Lily Chen. And that was a huge shift in focus for Autumn. And under Paul and Lily's guidance, we actually created the first Autumn Asia meeting that happened in 2010 in Beijing. And that was something, when I was president, we negotiated with the Autumn counterpart associations in Singapore, Taiwan, Japan, and China. So that really led to a fundamental shift. The other fundamental shift that happened while I was on the board was creation of RTTP. And this was an initiative that was led by Kevin Cullen, who basically said, as professional organizations and as professionals, we need to have certifications that actually signify the expertise that we bring to the table. And that led to the formation of ATTP I believe, again, in 2010. in 2011, and now ATTP has expanded to encompass multiple countries, and is a phenomenal impact on young professionals in major sort of technology transfer markets. So just wanted to sort of bring that perspective in as well.
Thank you so much, Andy, because that was bringing me up to some of the questions I had about the role of AUTM, and specifically how AUTM has influenced the professionalization of tech transfer and building a global community of practice. And with Alwyn here, I think Alwyn can now tag on to what you just talked about when it comes to that professionalism in having the certification, in having the organization that he's a part of, leading some of these conversations globally. So Alwyn, I want to talk to you specifically about what the RTTP should mean to us in the profession. I know many of us on this call have that designation, but what are your hopes from the organization of what this should mean for our profession?
I guess what came out with a very simple intention and objective, as Aaron Jip has mentioned, and till today, we would cite Kevin Coulin's statement about what technology transfer really is. And I still remember when Aaron was over in China in 2016, 17 or something, around that time.
Yep.
And he was saying that the profession has expanded so much. So we turned out from, Kevin's 1.0 up to the 5.0. And I'm still using Aaron Deep's PowerPoints to try to tell, what this profession is about. From ATTP, I guess my members would be pleased to know that we have now 16 full members and 1 associate member. The objective really is to expand the professionalism and also the professional practice in the innovation ecosystem space in different economies, to the extent that technology transfer practitioners and professionals will become a driving part of that economic and social development, as we always believed and we committed to as a professional, as also as a career person. So looking back in the last maybe 6 or 7 years, the RTTP designation was started as only a professional recognition similar to the CLPs, has expanded towards the apprenticeship side from the candidate RTTP, which takes about minimum 3 years with your supervisor to articulate your career development pathway at the early stage so that you would be qualified to apply for a full RTTP status. So that is the front end. And just this particular year in 2025, and the Alliance has added to what that articulation pathway, the RTTP ballot, to recognize those people who are no longer like entry-level RTTPs, who are seasoned enough, have proved their career professional contribution and also their service leadership to the communities like the AUTM ones, and we would designate them to as RTTP fellow. So along that spectrum, from apprentice to the masters, I hoped we will build an ecosystem globally and with local emphasis so that people like us will be able to nurture the next generations who will be the forthcoming like supporters and the operators for the next generations of tech transfers to come. And along that, of course, irrespective of the technology development, the AIs and all that, there is some sort of ethos that we know as professionals we have to, or we should be upholding. And those are the 9 principles by Kathy Koo, and maybe a lot of other stuff that we believed, whether you are doing licensing or doing entrepreneurship, that you should uphold. And together, I suppose, irrespective of where we are, the time zone differences, the spirit are the same. And I feel very much of that throughout my services, both in autumn and maybe prior to that, ISTA, the Chinese and Hong Kong Association, and also now the ATTP. And it has come around as a full circle for me personally, and that is a wonderful journey.
Thank you so much, Alan, for giving us that rundown of the RTTP and ATTP. And I think that's very important for us to understand. And it also goes back to what Arun said. It proves that we're not nuts. Okay. I had to get that one in. Dave, I know you've been sitting there. We haven't forgotten about you.
Yeah, no, and hopefully, for some reason, when we started this call, my laptop decided that it was going to use its microphone instead of the actual microphone. So I hope it's battered now.
It is. It is.
Yes.
I never touched it, I swear. Anyhow, that happens every now and then. So I'm struck by a couple of things that came up in these conversations. First of all, Steve, you may remember that a number of years ago, it's when I was on the board, we were at an annual meeting, and Brian O'Shaughnessy, who's a phenomenal colleague and advocate for everything that we do, and he's typically more a little involved maybe in LES, but he asked us out to meet with him for breakfast, I think, and says, why is there a CLP and an RTTP? Why don't we just combine these things? And I remember you and I spent a very pleasant conversation. At the end of that, Brian said, I see. It's basically because CLP is very much in this deep dive into licensing, and whereas what your community does, as we talked about here, covers a whole lot more of elements of the innovation ecosystem than simply licensing. Not suggesting licensing is simple, but it's way more than that, that we touch a lot more aspects of the soup to nuts. Hey, I threw it in there again. Notion of tech transfer and what it is. So that's really one important point, I think, that RTTP, and I date back to 2012 in that designation. So one of the older timers on that one. The other thing, before I forget this, we mentioned Better World Project, which I think came on board when my dear friend Mark Kroll was in the presidency. And one of our challenges at that time, as I recall, was that we were always accused of just chasing money. You're just chasing money for this. And one of the stories we wanted to tell was a richer story than simply money. It was, we make things better, we have an impact. And so we wanted to record that rather than just dollars. And I was at NC State shortly after that when the Vice Chancellor for Research decided that he didn't want us to report our revenues, even to the autumn survey. And I think you'll find that there's 1 year, if you look back, where NC State had a 0 on the revenue reported. And it wasn't because we didn't make money. We made some money. It was because the Vice Chancellor for Research said, I don't want to measure you on how much money you bring in. I want to measure you on how many companies come to deal with us, how many more interactions we have, how many people's lives we touch. And that was very insightful on his part, until it came time when the autumn survey was published and the local newspapers asked why we didn't have any revenue to report at NC State that year, which it was about $4 million, I think. So it kind of backfired a little bit, but I thought I really admired his idea that I'm not measuring you as an office by the revenue. I'd like you to make revenue, but I want you to be impactful. And I think that's a really important message to give to leadership at every level in an organization. And I certainly have that as a challenge now. Steve can see my background here. He used to sit in this very office not too many years ago. And so, remembers that this institution, 15 years ago now, Steve, had one of those unicorn, massive revenue generating licenses. And of course, everybody said, oh, we can do that again. Mm-hmm. Unicorns are very difficult to catch, it turns out. And, so that's a challenge we all face. Once you hit that huge hit out of the park, everybody wants you to get another one. And, so it does become a challenge managing expectations upwards to leadership and everybody else in your community. Why aren't you making that much money anymore? These things come along and we have to look for the broader picture rather than just those yeah, no kidding. Well, it was 90 million at one time, Steve, actually. So, it was a huge hit. And the good news is that the innovators who created that company have another startup company now, and they're in clinical trials with their new startup. So let's hope that they are a successful second time at bat.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. In one of our conversations, you and I talked about how decisions that Autumn Board made over the years, for example, moving to a model of having a CEO and how setting up what we now have as advocacy, what that looked like back then. Can you talk to us about these landmark initiatives or policies created by Autumn or influenced by Autumn, and how they have significantly advanced the field of tech transfer as we know it today?
Happy to do that, to talk about that again. So I was on the board also for 5 years. And a few of us have had that privilege, and I served as president as well. But I started my Autumn board service as VP for advocacy, again at a time when we had vice presidents of portfolios and an executive director. And through the whole process, this took several years, but during the 5 years that I was on the board, I think we changed from vice presidents to directors and having a cabinet. And you'll know the structure that is in place, pretty much the same now as it was when we made that transition. But the other major decision, and I hope that I had a fairly significant role in this, I certainly wasn't alone, but was that we really needed a figurehead and a face for the association. One of the challenges with having a rotating presidency is that every year, if you want to have an impact on the policymakers, and let's just say DC for shorthand, but it would apply everywhere, that the staff on those offices say, well, wait a minute, it was this person. You tell me I've got to learn someone else's name. And we decided as a board that, well, we need this position. At the time, we had a wonderful executive director, but not a practitioner of tech transfer. And we made a decision as a board that we really should have a practitioner of tech transfer as the face of, as a permanent position, leading Autumn. And a gentleman who's sitting over there, strangely, he's wearing a tie today. I thought he'd take the opportunity to shed it, but no. And we chose Steve, and I'm going to say kudos to us. We're patting ourselves on the back because that was a really important message. And one of the first things I did, if you remember, Steve, after you were appointed, you and I went up to DC, and I made a point. At the time, I was on the board of COGA as well, and so I made a point of introducing Steve as the person, the man, the voice of Autumn at the moment, to the COGA leadership, to the AAU leadership, and to the APLU leadership. And that was, I think, a really key inflection point for Autumn, having that face, that recognition. I think, Steve, you can speak now that, you know, when science and technology staffers want to call somebody about tech transfer, they call you. And that's exactly what we targeted. It's not that the chair position is less significant, it's just that the chair changes every year. And there is some requirement or preference for stability of a person you can actually pick up the phone and call and know it's going to be the same person with a consistent answer about the mission and positions of the organization. So again, all of us on the board at that time, I think, continue to pat ourselves on the back when we see how that actually happened. And by doing that, I think it advanced our position within the rest of the higher ed associations in getting us a seat at the table with them as they were deciding how to respond to policy challenges and issues that came up. You know, occasionally joining in an amicus brief with them when it was suitable for us to do so, and so on. And it's not that they weren't talking to us previously, but I think it just elevated the conversation now to a much more significant level. And I'm happy to say that continues to this day. So I think one of the best things that we did as an association, how long ago is that now, Steve? 10 years ago, probably, right? Yeah. So well done. Keep doing it.
Yeah. And I would add to that, to Dave, that I think that was just a good thing to do, because many of the chairs usually represents the universities, and oftentimes in their capacity, they may not be able to have some of these conversations on Capitol Hill, right? So having someone who is outside of the university to have certain conversation, especially in this current climate, it's so important to have someone like a Steve Sasalka at the helm. Aaron, your hand is up.
Steve's hand was up first, so Steve, go.
Yeah, thanks. So I just wanted to amplify a couple of things that Dave said. So number one, I've been really proud of this organization in that we've really gotten a seat at the big boy table when it comes to advocacy decisions. But I got to say that this is due to decades of work by this organization. And in particular, I want to recognize Dave. Dave was the VP of Advocacy. Many of you might know. I believe you testified in front of the House Small Business Committee. The Senate Small Business Committee. And so when I came on board, Dave was extremely generous with his time into introducing me to all of the contacts that have been built up across the Autumn portfolio over a decade. And that really allowed me a running start at our advocacy activities. So again, I think it was a really important move for the organization, and it really built upon decades of progress that had been accomplished by VPs of advocacy like Dave, Andy Cohn, and others before.
Yeah.
Thank you, Steve. Arun?
Yeah, it's interesting to me how Autumn has sort of evolved itself as an organization over time. When I first started there, it was a volunteer-run organization. At our annual meetings, the board was engaged with, okay, what kind of cookies are we going to serve at the break? To that level. And so over time, we brought on professional help. And for the longest time, especially when I was on the board, and even before I was on the board, I served on various committees, and the conversation had always evolved around what do we need to do as an organization to evolve from portfolio management at the board level to a strategic board. And in 2009, we finally had, I think, one of our first strategic planning meeting as an Autumn board that involved, I think, roughly 60 individuals from across the community, from industry, government, and universities. And we created that transition plan that was then implemented subsequently all the way through David's tenure as president. And over that time, we evolved from that portfolio approach to more of a strategic board. And I think that's done wonders for the organization. Bringing a CEO on board was a phenomenal decision. And so, all of that has the board has sort of wanted to keep up with how Autumn is viewed and how Autumn should be viewed going forward. So just wanted to put that context out there.
We appreciate that context, Arun. We have just a few more minutes to go, so I'm going to try to ask my top questions so we can get it in. But the next question is about commercialization and how it's far more complex than it was in the past. What are the biggest challenges facing tech transfer offices today, from compliance to IP evaluation to stakeholder engagement? I'll throw that out to you first, Laura.
Thanks, Almisha. I think, as we've touched on a lot in this call, the field of tech transfer has really morphed and shifted over time. And one of the comments that Kathy Koo made at a recent meeting is this notion that tech transfer is expected to boil the ocean. So we keep getting more and more assignments. Our role and our scope keeps shifting and changing and growing and encompassing more and more activities. And I do think that is a big risk to us, how we manage that at each of our organizations. So that, I think, is a huge, huge challenge for us. Additionally, as more monies get available and unique sources of monies like the NSF engines, like other things that are coming out of the TIP directorate, money never comes completely free. It always comes with strings attached. And I think we're going to learn of the new strings, especially on the reporting side and the metrics side. And that may be a good thing for us as a profession or not so good. You know, if history is a teacher for us, the point that Dave made about we used to be really focused on measuring the numeric parts of what we do, and especially the money. What is that going to mean for us and our day-to-day work, and what kinds of innovations we're going after? Are we only going to be going after blockbuster drugs, or are we also going to be looking at social innovations and things that have an impact to real people in their day-to-day life? So I think those are some of the commercialization challenges that we have.
Thank you, Laura. And Alwyn, I want to throw this one up to you about the globalization of tech transfer. How do we ensure that the best practices translate across cultures, legal systems, and ecosystems? Because Autumn have over 60 plus members from different countries. I mean, different countries represented for Autumn. How do we as a profession ensure that these translate across these different regions?
Well, I guess, from a combined perspective from Autumn and also from member associations for ATTP, my straightforward and foremost consideration would be under different cultural manifestations, and we have to respect the individual diversity. But collectively, as somebody who is in this community of professionals, there are professional ethics that we need to think about and we need to uphold. So there's the money side of things, there are the tangible side of efforts and metrics, there are also the intangible side. And for me, I have it easy because I get to focus on capacity building of communities and people. So I guess, whereby people have to worry about the policies in terms of some of the national government, the triple helix. My focus, it is actually to ensure the next generation and the young professionals coming into the practice would have that cultural diversity, but maintained the impact and the objective and the kind of ethos that we want to uphold for technology transfer. And that can be very easily demonstrated and clarified. And I hope going forward, even with the assistance of AI and all that, is going to help us to be able to get rid of some of our operational burden. But there are certain things, if you take AI as your partner, if you ask the AI whatever engine they are, and if you ask them what they cannot do, they would always, well, I try that. They will come back and tell me a lot of those things are about people, the psychology, the judgments, and negotiation and stuff like that. So as a collective of people from all over the world, what we need to do is to make sure then we go, as we move forward, we would uphold the kind of integrity, the ethics, and to put into our practice. And we still the collegiality, despite, if I take Autumn, for example, 3,000 members, individuals, and if we need to get somebody to help, pick up the phone call, send an email in the e-group, and I see responses. So those are the very good cultures and practice that Autumn has already developed in the past 5 decades, and keep it forward and demonstrate it and be an exemplifying example to the world.
Thank you, Alwyn. I don't think I can put that answer anywhere better than you did. You touched on so many different points that's so important. And you talked about ensuring as well, even without saying it, that there's some diversity within our organization. So how do we respect that and move that forward? With that, I want to spend the last 10 minutes focusing on the future of the field. So for those that have been around for a while, what skills or mindsets do you think will be essential for the future generation of tech transfer professionals? And I think we could touch on the mentorship piece there because throughout this conversation, I heard the names of people who have influenced all of us in our different professions. So how do we do that? Dave, you're muted.
Jump in first just with something to tag back to Aaron's early conversations. I mean, we have changed, and I think going forward, this change is going to be deep-seated, and that is we're less patent-centric. I mean, that was the currency we used, and it's what you measured almost every interaction and contractual obligation you had. They still exist. Obviously, patents are still here. They're different. The value may not be the same in an IA-driven world, and I think that is one of the real challenges, at least for this old dog, to try and figure out, well, okay, I understood, I think, the value of the currency of the patent world. We move beyond that, and it's a whole different set of rules. I mean, the patent landscape is significantly changed now. Our expectations, our ability to maybe tap into impactful revenue generating licenses that come to bear fruit a lot more rapidly than waiting for a drug to be approved in 10 years or even a device in 5 years or whatever it is, has really changed the whole dynamic of what we can license. And what is this we have? Is this even patentable? What is it now that we have as our asset that we can somehow enter into a contractual arrangement with another party for them to bring this to market? So that out of the box, at least at the old box that we were in, thinking is really going to be a significant challenge or a learning curve that is going to have to be addressed, I think, sooner rather than later.
Okay.
David, I'd like to kind of build a little bit on that. And I think the language of technology transfer has changed, right? So from patents and licensing to technologies and now, we talk about innovations broadly, and innovations can happen in multiple disciplines. And so one of the things that I think is critical for us is, how do we get those innovations out of the university and into the hands of the public? And licensing is just one mechanism that enables us to do that. There are other mechanisms that we need to think about that enable that movement of innovation from universities into the hands of public, whether, as Laura mentioned, whether it's, for social impact or community impact or commercial impact. So I think our perspective needs to be a lot broader. As David said, that's where we're heading as innovators. And to that end, when you take a look at what's happening in the UK and the EU, they talk in terms of knowledge transfer.
Yes.
And that knowledge transfer perspective, I think, is now becoming more of a norm in the US as opposed to technology transfer.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, because many of us, including myself, has changed the name of our office to more of an innovation management office, because it's so much that is being done, especially, when you have the Chips and Science Act, and there are different things going on, like the art program and and NSF engines, and you find out that you're doing more from your office. And Laura alluded to this as well. So it became a time for you to start thinking,
Yeah.
do I stick myself in this bucket, or do I expand and then make sure that we're still doing what we are supposed to do in terms of research translation, but approaching it from different perspectives?
Yeah, and if I could just add something there, I think one of the things we're going to start seeing more and more of in the future at tech transfer offices is this shift in the attitude from we patent and we license toward one where we're engaged in the business development of these innovations one by one.
Mm-hmm.
So we are more and more being involved in administering programs that help with innovation development. So sort of the business development side of these very early innovations, and helping entrepreneurial teams and others recognize sources of funding, recognize the gaps in the development, recognize what is being needed by the customers, and helping them put together this holistic view of what is the innovation now, where does it need to go to be commercially viable, and what do I have to do in between? And the tech offices are playing a much more active role in those processes now, today, than ever before.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Laura. And so this question that I have, I know we could take up the next 5 minutes with it, but looking ahead, and this for each of you to respond to, if we can get there, but looking ahead to the next 50 years, what do you hope the legacy of today's tech transfer leaders will be? You can include yourself in this.
I'll jump in first because then I don't have to. I hope that there'll be a continuation of our trend and our movement into not necessarily the driver's seat, but a contributor that will be seen in these offices as key and necessary elements of the innovation ecosystem. Right, that that you don't just move into distinct channels, that they're connected, they're interconnected, having people who understand what the researcher needs and what the business community, what the market needs, is one of those key roles that I think we can play and we should continue to play. And when policymakers talk about what investments they're going to make, well, you hope that we continue to be at the to one of the areas where they come and ask for, they ask Steve or his successor in however many years, in 20, 30 years. You're going to stay that long, right, Steve? Just make sure we're at the table still, because otherwise decisions are made in a vacuum if we're not part of that. We are part of the process, and we need to be certain that we continue our advocacy efforts to keep ourselves in the sight of those who make decisions about money that's going to be spent and invested in the technology space that we work in.
Absolutely. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think from a broad sense, looking into 50 years in the future for the world, I think the only thing we must keep unchanged is our ethical approach to technology transfer. And it can only be built upon with people. And collectively, we are stakeholders and beneficiaries of policymakers, whatever policy that would be addressed to us at the national level, or maybe even at the university level. The BIDOS Act, and also how the university would build, bringing money as a KPI or not to report it, as Dave said. So how do we collectively as a community would impact upon the rest of us in the world? Because everybody is going to compete very much on this innovation front. And without ethics, we'll be stealing IPs. You'll be stepping on other people's shoulders. But our agenda really, collectively, we are there to see, and my wishful thinking would be to see, if I quote, of course, I don't know Oren Herkowitz that much, but he is a great example to me by looking at his profile from somebody who is not from the technology side, getting into technology transfer, absorb the culture, absorb the people, and change things. And then he moved ahead to do his work with a philanthropy or impact investment for that kind of service leadership. And we need more of that for our next generations. And we are in the prime positions as university administrators and also maybe commercial managers in our own professions to breed more people like that collectively.
Thank you, Alwyn.
Just building on what David and Alwyn said, I think one of the things that we have to decide is, what is our identity, right? And how is that going to move forward? I've always kind of viewed the role as being facilitators and connectors, which is, hey, I'm here to facilitate the startup. I'm here to facilitate the technology development. I'm here to facilitate the licensing. I'm here to make connections that will enable people to do what they need to do and what they want to do. And, that's from the tech transfer staff who report to me, plus the faculty that I work with, the investors. And I think that is really what this role is evolving into and what it should be. And I think if we do that, then we're always going to have a seat at the table, because that's the nexus of bringing innovations to the market. And I think that's really where this profession has headed, is going to continue to head.
And I'll wrap up and be really brief. I think for the future, what we're going to be remembered for and known for is how we make people feel. And this business has always been all about the relationship. And I think our relationship with the general public, our local ecosystem, our newspapers, how we have an impact on how science and advancements and innovation are viewed. I think that's really what's going to be remembered and become lasting and important.
Thank you so much. Help me thank our panelists, Arun, Laura, David, and Alwyn, and our honorary panelist, Steve. I think this has been a great water cooler. I hope you've learned something about how the growth and changes in tech transfer over the years have occurred, and Autumn's impact on that. And again, all this information will be available on our website. Go there. There's lots of information celebrating the 50th anniversary at Autumn. Thank you so much for being a part of this great association. You heard from these folks that are over 75 years combined in the tech transfer profession. And thank you so much for joining us, and see you at the next water cooler.